by offering Islamic finance as an alternative, ethical, equitable solution to the masses, and to enhance the knowledge of Islamic finance to everyone by digitalizing it and making it available to all. Our speaker today is a well known name when it comes to Islamic Fintech. Mufti Farad Azam is joining us from UK. We are honored to have him as a Sharia advisor with Taif. He is the advisory to a number of well known global Islamic finance institutions. He is on a number of global Sharia boards in countries and have published over dozens of research papers in contemporary Islamic finance matters. Today's webinar is the third of a series where we'll be focusing on a particular area of Islamic fintech, that is neobanking, Islamic neobanking. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
It's good to see you.
Likewise. Alhamdulillah, it's an honor and a pleasure to join everybody.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you very much. So, Mufti, let's start today's class by the first question. What is neobanking?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in ma ba'd. Respected brothers, sisters, elders and friends, welcome to the third installment of the Islamic Fintech series. I guess it's been a very engaging, interesting and beneficial from all the comments I've seen and the feedback we received. Alhamdulillah, it's been beneficial for everybody. And I guess this area is so new, and really the discussions, we need to have these kind of discussions because these are opportunities. Right? The whole fintech area is an opportunity for Muslims to really not only grow their services, but to showcase their entrepreneurship. I think we have a lot of talent, a pool of talent from across the world. And this is the area where we can express our entrepreneurship, our talent, our skills, and really serve Muslims. I mean, one of the greatest, I think, elements of fintech is the ability to impact those who are in the far corners of the world, especially with the smartphone. The smartphone has given us, limitless possibilities, and that's the gateway to, honestly, to financial services. The smartphone now that we have, and you'll find a person, whether they're in Africa, whether they're in Asia, whether they're in Australia or the Americas, every person has a smartphone with them. And so the smartphone is the gateway now to most of these fintech platforms and fintech services. And therefore, what we're seeing now is, alhamdulillah, more Sharia compliant products, more halal opportunities, more halal wealth, and access to more halal funds as a result of fintech. So it's great to see us as a group here and Muslims at large across the world trying their best to see how they can uh, take advantage of the opportunities fintech provides. And this is just in its infancy. Our discourse is purely in foundational infancy. The fintech world is in its infancy. We'll see a great shift in the next 15 to 20 years. And so it's good we start, planting the seeds from now, so that come 20 years time, inshallah, we have a very global reach, a very powerful, robust, systematic, comprehensive, holistic, wholesome Islamic financial services for the entire ummah, regardless of where you are. And the idea is that we can connect to every single Muslim wherever they may be. Right? That's a vision, that's a reality, and it'll become a reality. The more we engage, inshallah, the more we'll see this happening. So going to your first question, right, which is really kicks off the today's session, is what is neobanking? And I guess most people will have seen this word, this term online, on social media, on some webinars. And the word neo banking, if we break it down, neo is a Greek term, okay, which means new. It's translated as new, meaning it's new banking. So, what is new about this type of banking? Well, I guess there's many things which are new about neobanking, but really it's the whole 2008 global financial crisis. That's when things started to really change. And I touched upon this in the previous session as well, when we talked about alternative finance. How 2008, the global financial crisis, is really a shift in financial services that has really changed the landscape. It made many smart people redundant. It made banking more difficult and strict. More regulations came in. As a result, these redundant people who had years of experience and tech firms growing, the smartphone being created in what 2008, 2009, the iPhone was introduced in 2007. So in that period, it was 2, 3 years. The smartphones were introduced. All these jigsaw pieces came together, and it allowed people then to say, take advantage of the smartphone, have a talent pool of people who just been made redundant from all these big investment banks, but they had a
Yeah.
banking experience. And finally, the regulation of banks, where it became more difficult for SMEs and normal businesses to potentially
Memang
get.
walaupun ada beberapa tantangan di dalam terkait dengan regulasi.
Sorry, if you can mute yourselves, please, I'd be appreciated. So all these different individuals and elements which came together allowed for the growth of this sector, that what we're talking about, neobanking, where this idea of challenger banks has come, right? And neobank. So what is a neobank then, in essence? A neobank doesn't necessarily mean it's a new bank in any way, shape, or form, in the sense as a complete alternative to a traditional bank. When neobanks is this new set of banking services which are challenging traditional banking, meaning they set up the service, the platform, the experience is it's a challenge to alternative banks. Although neobanks, in and of themselves, might not be necessarily banks altogether. They might not have the same license as a traditional bank. So, if we were to summarize what a neobank is a new experience of banking where a customer can benefit from banking services, but it does not necessarily mean that the service provider is a fully fledged bank. It can be just a gateway to a traditional bank. It can be a platform which doesn't have a banking license, but yet you can access a number of banking services through this portal, through this platform. Sorry, we can't hear you.
Thank you very much, Mufti, for explaining in detail about what is neobanking. I'm sure people have a broader vision of what neobanking is. So the next question, with neobanking, that coincide with digital banking. And people confuse neobanking with digital banking. Are they the same thing, or is there a difference in neobanking and digital banking?
It's a very good question. I mean, so neobanks and digital banks, and to be honest, there's a number of terms which are being used interchangeably across the world. Some people are using the word neobank, some people are using the word digital banks, some people are using the word virtual banks, some people are using the word challenger banks, some people are using the word alternative banking. These are all terms, and everybody uses these terms differently. So there's no codified uh, terminology, right? You have to see the context within which the term and the word is being used. So the question for our purpose and for our webinar is neobank, neobanking and digital banking the same, or are neobanks and digital banks the same thing? Now, neobanks we described as this new kind of platform model whereby a person can experience banking services, but not necessarily from a fully fledged bank. It might be a platform. It might just be an intermediary, right? A digital intermediary, which is white labeling the traditional banking, right? So keep that in your mind. Digital banks, on the other hand, often when in the industry, when the word digital banking is used, generally it refers to traditional banks who have full-fledged licenses to operate a bank. And of course, to operate a bank, you need a number of licenses because you're keeping deposits, giving deposits, lending. There's anti-money laundering compliance required. A number of other regulations which are required. The capital requirements. So a digital bank would generally refer to a traditional bank which has a full-fledged license to bank and to offer banking services, but through a digital medium. So a digital bank can be considered to be a digital version of your traditional bank in every sense. So it's your same traditional bank with all the licenses, and it is the primary provider. There's no intermediary between you and the underlying bank. That digital bank that you're experiencing is the traditional bank. And so in the fintech industry and in the banking industry, usually when the term banking is used, it really refers to these regulated, licensed providers which just have a digital provider. So it can be your traditional Barclays Bank, it can be a HSBC Bank, and these big traditional banks that we have in the world, but they have a digital interface and you're using their digital platform to access your banking services. That would be a form of digital banking, right? Uh, and therefore, that's really what digital banking refers to generally in our context. Yes, but as I said, the word digital bank is um, the word digital bank can also refer to neobanks in certain cases. It just depends on the use of the term.
Thank you very much, Sheikh. Sheikh, are there any real examples of existing neobanks?
Yeah, so there's a number of examples. I mean, we have different types of neobanks, and as I said, neobanking is such a large or such a broad umbrella term, where it can include banks, digital banks which have a license, or online banks which have a license, and online banks which don't have a license. So if there's a spectrum, right, of banks, those neobanks which are fully functional and which have their own license, meaning they can offer complete banking services such as debit cards, credit cards, current accounts, deposits, lending, savings accounts, all these types of services which a traditional bank can offer, this neobank can offer as well because it has a license. Therefore, they will be more or less the same as your traditional bank, but purely digital. And remember one thing about neobanks, I think one of the key differences is neobanks generally don't have any physical branch. That's like a key sign of a neobank, a challenger bank, whereby there are no physical branches whatsoever. It's purely a smart bank. And what we mean by that, it only exists on your smartphone. It only exists online. There is no physical branch you can go to. As opposed to a digital bank, which is a digital, you could say, manifestation of a traditional bank. And of course, being a digital manifestation of a traditional bank would mean that you can go to a physical branch and access banking services. Right? So keep that in your back of your mind. Neobanks generally are only digital. And so asking about examples, if there's a spectrum, right? On one side of the spectrum, there's those neobanks which have the license to offer banking services, such as you have Starling Bank, you have Revolut, N26, Monzo. These are the common kind of digital your neobanks which now have a license to offer banking services, right? So they are licensed to offer a range of banking services. And then on your other side, you have those which have no um, a license to offer banking services, such as, I mean, Yolt is potentially one which offers some kind of integration with um, your banking services, but it's more of like your wealth management kind of a platform. But it's those neobanks which have no bank license whatsoever. I mean, in the UK, you have Risk Digital Bank, which don't have their own license as yet, right? So they're on this side of the spectrum to offer banking services. And there's a number of like Kestrel, Risk, Insha in Germany. You have Nia. You have so these are like the key. You could say Islamic challenger banks which are coming, which their license might not be the same as um, a challenger bank which has a license and can offer complete banking services. So these would not be offering complete banking services at present until they get their full license.
Thank you very much for giving us examples of neo banking, neo banks. So now we are going into further detail, and people are curious about the advantages. What are the advantages of these types of banking platforms?
So it's a very good question. I mean, in terms of advantages, I guess it's a matter of the user interface and a number of things whereby any person who's used a challenger bank's app or any such app, we know when you use an app on a smartphone, especially when it's been developed well, the the experience is usually much, you could say, uh, satisfactory is very satisfactory, right? It's very there's a lot of satisfaction, a lot of you could say ease of use, a lot of enjoyment in using that interface. And so, if we were to think of the advantages of a neobank, of using the services of a neobank, one of the key ones I think would be number one is a hassle-free account creation. If anybody here has gone to open up a bank account with a traditional bank, these large banks which have physical branches, you would know how difficult it is. You need an ID, you need to book an appointment. I tried to open a bank account with an Islamic bank. I had to fill out an entire form. I had to fill out an entire form, and because they were not taking any, there were no appointments available to see anybody at the branch. So I had to fill out an entire form, post the form, wait for them to approve, and then they would send back my ID in the post, right? So you can understand how difficult and how you could say cumbersome opening a bank account can be with a traditional bank, right? There's all these layers. Whereas if you go on one of these challenger banks or these neo banks and try to open a bank account with them, and there's some which actually state this, like Insha, which is based in Germany, which intends to expand across the entire Europe, right? So it's an Islamic bank, a digital bank, and they want to expand across the entire Europe. They say on the website that you can open a bank account in less than 10 minutes, right? It takes only 10 minutes to open a bank account. And I've opened a bank account with one of these challenger banks. All you have to do is literally switch your, like, you take a photo of your ID, you put your details in, whether it's a passport or your driver's license, and then you just take a picture, take a selfie, or you take a selfie, a picture of your face, and that is the verification done. The authentication is done, and that so you had now an opportunity to have banking services within 10 minutes of just scanning your ID, taking a photo, and done. I never had to fill out any long forms or any like cumbersome kind of signatures required in every page, and sending important documents away. So one of the key or one of the fundamental and primary benefits of neobanking is, I would say, is hassle-free account creation. That's number one. Number two, which is definitely a something to mention, is the user-friendly interface. Any person who's used a an app of a challenger bank will notice how user friendly the interface is. You can do a number of things. It's very crisp, very clean, very neat, hardly any glitches. Usually, it's very smooth, and you can just scroll around. You can access a number of services. It's very responsive. I guess that's the word, right? It's very responsive and well designed to meet the needs of current day customers. And that's really where the market is. The UX and the UI, the user experience and the user interface has to be such that it aligns with the current kind of trends that we have in other apps in other areas. Because it can't be that banking, which is, I would say, one of the primary and fundamental services which humans use on a daily basis, right, to access funds. It can't be that that experience is more cumbersome or less, you could say, uh, at a substandard level in comparison to your gaming and all these kind of your food deliveries, your Ubers and all of these things, right? It has to be at par, and I guess that's what this neobank revolution is trying to address. That your banking experience should not be any you know inferior as an experience than your food delivery or than your taxi order or your other forms of work communications. For example, we all use product management and project management tools. And you have monday.com and all these different websites now. Now you can see how user friendly, how colorful these things are. The user experience, the user interface is at a very superior level. Now, how can it be that a bank, be any less or be any inferior? So I guess the banks are trying to now, or the neobanks are seeing this kind of area and they're exploiting this. And don't forget one thing. Who are the primary customers of neobanks? It's usually the youth, right? It's those people who are very tech savvy. It's the youngsters and the youth who are very tech savvy, who have a lot of interest in this kind of experience, because for research shows that those who are 50 plus, they generally wouldn't tend to switch over to a neobank. They are more set in stone and set in their ways of using a traditional bank. They're happy to walk to the bank at 9:30 in the morning and withdraw their cash. Whereas the youth, they don't have time for that. They have the smartphone. They rather just access funds from the smartphone. So it's more likely that the younger generation will be using these neobank services as opposed to the elderly. And when that's the case, the platform, the services must be such that it attracts the youth. It chimes with their kind of experiences elsewhere.
Thank you very much, Sheikh. You just mentioned the word tech savvy and you tell where it's the 50 plus people and then the young youth who is looking into these areas. They don't want to go outside, make things easy and fast. But there is a lot of risk issues that elderly people see. Do you think it's easy to adopt for them to get to know this?
So in terms of risk, I guess look, there's a number of issues. Um, Firstly, neobanks will definitely, I mean, their apps will definitely be used to some degree because of the service that they provide. Until traditional banks don't catch up, and they will catch up. Look, these traditional banks are huge; they're powerhouses. They can, afford to buy out these banks and incorporate them into their services. Nothing stops them like that. Like they have the funds available, they have the power. So until that doesn't happen, until these big banks don't start incorporating some of these services, you'll see the youth generally adopting or using what I feel will be the case is as a secondary or tertiary bank account. You'll start seeing uh, these neobanks will be not the primary. I don't think they'll ever become for many the primary form of banking. I think everybody will still have to a large degree the traditional bank accounts. But what will start happening is you'll start using this neobank account for stuff like international remittances, right? Because they're faster, easier, and generally cheaper. You'll start using it for your currency exchange. You'll start using it for charity. Many Islamic neobanks are now offering the ability to give zakat and sadaqah via your phone, the app itself, right? So you'll start seeing people using these neobank apps to um, give charity, to give sadaqah. Smart reporting is another area whereby you can see and manage your wealth. Some digital banks, they allow you to have a complete view of all your bank accounts. So, for example, Kestrel, which I'm aware of in the UK, they're offering this kind of ability to have an overview of all your bank accounts and see what's going on, right? So that's like one stop for all your accounts, and so then you can see the trends in your accounts. You can see, the movement of your finances and your funds, the income outgoings. So it's all in one place. So I guess it'll be more for these kinds of services. We'll see adoption of neobanking platforms. Uh, in terms of it being the primary bank, I guess it will be like Starling Bank, right? Many people are using Starling Bank, um, and I guess that's because it has its license and it's really friendly to use. So there will be a shift, but it'll be a shift when those banks, and for Islamic banking anyway, people will really start adopting Islamic neobanks when Islamic neobanks have a full-fledged license to offer complete banking services. That's when I think the jump will come. But until then, I think there's still a room for improvement for the digital banks or the neobanks. I'll still see people, especially the elderly generation, they'll still be holding on to the traditional banks.
Thank you very much, Sheikh, for telling us about the risk related to neobank and people, how they're going to adopt things, and so on and so forth. The next question that I have is, what is banking as a service?
Okay, so now this is a bit more technical, and it's a really good question. I mean, most people would have seen the word SaaS, and there's BaaS, SaaS, and there's all these funny like acronyms, right? But software as a service, PaaS, platform as a service. There's infrastructure as a service. So this whole new area of as a service, where you can get anything as a service, or everything as a service as well, right? It all goes back down to cloud computing, where nowadays you can access certain services without having a physical infrastructure. Meaning, a company can export its services as a software, as opposed to you getting in-house, getting a full package or getting the full infrastructure within your within your premises. So think of it classically. This is a very basic example, but just as an example, uh, when there was no such thing as your Google Drive, or your OneDrive, or your Dropbox and these things, where there was no cloud storages, you'd have to have a USB or an external hard drive. These big hard drives, and before, going back 10, 15 years, if you remember how big these hard drives would be, they'd be huge, right? And now they've been downsized. But in those days, right, the hard drives, external hard drives anyway, used to be huge, and you couldn't get so much space. I mean, 1 terabyte, 2 terabytes were probably the most you could get on a computer, and if you're lucky, 1 terabyte. I remember back in 2010, I was looking for a laptop. It was hard to find a laptop, at some stages of 1 terabyte, for a good decent price. So you'd have to physically have the storage capability and the physical, presence of the hard drive to store data. And so you'd have to have the maintenance costs, you'd have to have purchasing costs, you'd have to have the space for it, and everything that brings with it. Now, magnify that to a company and to a business. Think about a huge business, a huge company, which would need, forget 1 terabyte. It'll need so much, like thousands of terabytes, right? It'll need millions potentially for the stuff, the data that they have. Now imagine storing all of that kind of data, the kind of systems you need in place, the infrastructure you need in place, the maintenance that's required, the personnel that's required. right? You'd have to bring all of that in-house to offer those services. Now, what software as a solution SaaS has done is it's allowed to cut all of that out. So what it's done is it's completed, because of cloud computing and the development of cloud services, you can now access all of this kind of storage facility without even having a single physical presence in your store, in your company, in your warehouse. You don't need any kind of physical, infrastructure. All your hardware is no longer required. It's purely drained to software. Hardware is no longer required, and therefore you can outsource all the hardware to somebody else. You're just paying for the software, right? And all your data now is kept elsewhere. It's stored on the cloud and is accessible anywhere. And so, if coming back to our banking, or this idea of banking as a software, that's what it comes down to, this idea of where you are now benefiting from banking services, but remotely. It's not that you need, potentially, you don't need to have all the banking infrastructure licenses, but yet you can access banking experiences. So I guess when we talk about banking as a service, to summarize, it just describes a model in which licensed banks can then integrate uh, digital services within their platforms. So banking as a service is more about these licensed banks tapping into school smart services from other providers, but they integrate that into their products, right? And they can integrate it in other places as well. So that's really the banking as a service. It's about integration, smart, smooth integration, where it's only the software that's being integrated without any of the hardware and without any of all the cumbersome elements that come with running a bank and having a banking license.
Thank you very much. You just say about the integration without involving any hardware. That's what Taif is trying to do here, to integrate.
No, exactly. And to be honest, and this is a good example you mentioned. Like, many of us would have seen. An example that came to my head. So your supermarkets. Some supermarkets that you go to might have their own credit card, right? They might have some kind of bank account, right? So, for example, we have in the UK we have something called Tesco. We have Sainsbury's. They offer their own credit cards. What is that? It's the banking products, right? These traditional banks are offering their banking services, right, to non-banks. So it's being passported to these, you could say, non-banking platforms and retail. These are retail shops, right? They're offering banking services. How is that possible? It's because of these APIs that we have. And we have our fintech team here. They can go into what APIs are in more detail. But they have these webhooks and APIs which allow, it's just basic coding, which allows these non-banks, these retail supermarkets, to now access banking services. So one is the integration, where traditional banks themselves can integrate new services, but then really BaaS and banking as a service comes here in the light where you have supermarkets, you have the traditional stores, superstores, which offer banking services, and that's really where you can see banking as a service, because a supermarket is not a bank. A supermarket is not a bank. How can it offer a credit card? How can it offer, a bank account? It's just doing it through a BaaS, a banking as a service, because they've purchased the banking as a service from a bank. That's all it goes down to. So yeah, I mean, if you see Taif offering you, a credit card, or Taif of a Sharia compliant credit card, that is, or Taif offering you a bank account, then no, it's not. Taif has not become a bank. Rather, it's using banking as a service.
Thank you very much. So coming back to these product and services in neobanking that you have been mentioning about, people would like to know what are the Sharia concerns with these banking product and services.
Yeah. So when it comes to Sharia concerns, I guess it just depends on um, the life cycle, where a neobank is in its life cycle. Because think of a neobank having an economic life cycle, a business life cycle. It begins like any venture capital, right? A venture capital, if anybody's seen the life cycle of a venture capital, where it's in a startup phase and it's in, a venture capital phase and it's in growth phase, maturity and decline. These are the different phases that a company goes through its business life cycle. And so a neobank is still in a startup phase. It's very much early phase. And therefore, generally, it doesn't have its own license. It relies upon the license of another bank. It generally it's connected, it's white labeling the services of another bank. And so for a neobank, which is in its primary startup phase, it must make sure that the funds that it has are ring fenced and they are not integrated within interest bearing deposits, interest bearing accounts, or when they're using the services of a traditional bank, it shouldn't be that a traditional bank is deploying those funds for interest transactions. They should be at to the furthest extent possible, ring fencing of funds. That's the greatest concern, and of course that's from a back end perspective. From the front end, a neobank cannot offer any service which is not Sharia compliant. So all of its services need to be structured in a way which are Sharia compliant. Therefore, its bank accounts, they can't offer any interest on savings that you have, any current accounts, any remittances must be done in a Sharia compliant way. As we mentioned, a neobank allows people to remit funds across the world. So that structure and process needs to be Sharia compliant as well, because not every remittance is Sharia compliant. It just depends on what's actually happening. The fees, the charges, the way funds are moving, flowing, what's happening in the interim. These things need to be addressed. Likewise, charity payments. If a neobank is offering the ability to pay zakat, it must make sure that it's dealing with that properly, because dealing with zakat is not a light matter, right? So it's a very serious matter, requires a lot of governance. So the Sharia governance framework must be robust to ensure that zakat is being paid in a correct way and being channeled to the correct source. If you're paying a charity, the charity needs to be vetted to ensure that its practices and policies are Sharia compliant, right? Likewise, if a neobank is offering other services, all such services need to be one. For example, cashback is another one. Some neobanks offer cashbacks. Now, the cashback has to be structured in a way which is Sharia compliant, right? And there's a way to structure a Sharia compliant cashback, which I've personally developed as well for a challenger bank, where I structured for them their cashback services, how to do it in a Sharia compliant way. Some challenger banks might be offering you, points on certain things. Some challenger banks I know have taken Sharia compliance to such a level whereby you're not allowed to use their cards to purchase alcohol or to purchase casino services. You can't use a card in a casino. So to that level and depth, they have control over the banking codes. So these are, I think, the key concerns for a challenger bank, which is in its infancy. Of course, when a bank now morphs and grows into a full-fledged licensed bank, and it's in its like mature phase, then there's a number of other factors. The way it manages funds, the products that it's offering now, because it's has its own license, it can offer many more products and services as a bank. So each product and service would need to be reviewed, structured in a Sharia compliant way. It would need to be certified. It would need to be audited. It need to have constant uh, iterative review and constant work upon it to ensure that everything's running smoothly. And that's where the role of scholars would come in to ensure that everything is running smoothly uh, as it has set out to be initially.
Thank you very much, Sheikh. Okay, Sheikh. Another question that arises in my head is it should be Sharia compliant and all those things. Like people are not so technical in these terms. So how to make sure that these neobanks who doesn't have a physical existence and people don't like to read a lot of like you know uh, what is it called, their acceptance criteria, and they need to know, okay, what is right and wrong, terms and condition. So how to make sure that is this neobank or this particular bank is Sharia compliant
It's a very
for
good
a, for a
question.
labor for a labor from a labor perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. And look, from the layperson perspective, your own responsibility is, if there's a scholar, and that's why it's really important, it's almost, I'd say, mandatory for any offering to have uh, some kind of Sharia advisor or scholar involved reviewing the processes, just because the non-compliance risk is huge. The Sharia non-compliance risk is really high. If and the only way to mitigate that risk, one of the strongest mitigants for non-compliance risk is to have scholars involved, who would expert scholars in this space who can review, advise, structure, develop, and audit. And so, from a layperson perspective, I guess your first port of call would be to see, is a Sharia advisor involved, right? Do they have a scholar? And if they have a scholar, really you are absolved. You are not required then to investigate further. You can trust, from an Islamic perspective, it's you can trust the scholar's view. He's a knowledgeable scholar, he's a reputable scholar. You can take his opinion. He's known for his piety, or he has nothing which is alarming about him. Then you can take his view and his opinion, and you can bank. Inshallah, you've done your what's your duty as a lay person. It's the scholar's responsibility. It's his duty. He'll be accountable, even from an Islamic perspective. He's accountable to ensure everything is Sharia compliant. If anything is not Sharia compliant, he'll be liable primarily in front of Allah. That's the key. That's how important and delicate this matter is. So that's why uh, the Sharia advisor, the Sharia scholar, it's his duty to ensure everything is Sharia compliant. As a layperson, if you see a Sharia advisor, you can be rest assured, inshallah, most of these advising scholars are well versed. They know what they're doing, and they do, fully, um, take this job seriously. From my kind of experience, they take this very seriously in ensuring everything Sharia compliant, because it's a big duty. You're talking about people's livelihood, people's money being halal and haram. And we know the hadith whereby the Prophet ﷺ told us about this person who, he told us, I think of a person who's in a desert. He's disheveled, his hair's all over the place. He's traveling, and then he raises his hands and he starts saying, Ya Rab, that, oh Allah, answer my dua. The Prophet said that how can his dua be accepted when ghudhiya bil haram, he's been fed with haram, he's been drinking haram, he's clothed with haram, فَأَنَّا يُسَجَابُ لَهُ. The Prophet said, how can such a person's dua be accepted? Because his clothing is haram, his food is haram, his income is haram. So, this area of halal and haram income is a very serious matter, because it means your dua, your prayers will be impacted, right? And from the hadith, we learn that duas are not accepted in this stage. And so imagine now for an advisor or scholar to being in that position, having to judge whether something is halal or not halal. It's a very delicate and serious matter, because if he makes a mistake, or if he's careless, that means, let alone the dua of everybody else, inshallah, that's a different matter. But his own prayers, his own dua, his own accountability to Allah, it's a grave matter. So I guess the first and foremost thing is to see if a scholar is there. If a neobank does not have a scholar, they don't have a scholar, then that would mean you should do some kind of research yourself. Look at the banking, look at their products, their services, look at what they're offering. You'll have to dig deep a bit to understand everything, understand the mechanics in the back end, and then you can proceed with using the services of a neobank.
MashaAllah. Thank you very much for explaining. This was a very critical and a narrow point when it comes to Islamic perspective, deciding on something. I hope it have clears many people's confusions when choosing a bank. So the one last question, Mufti, before I move on to Q&A and pick the questions from Q&A answer from Zoom participants, I would like to know one more thing, like a little bit light, if you put on what is open banking.
Okay, so I guess the last question about open banking, platform banking, these are like terms which are used in the industry and they refer to something completely different from what we've been discussing uh, in neobanks. Open banking and platform banking are not the same, right? But there's also the word called shadow banking. So if we talk about open banking just means non-banks accessing data from customers' bank accounts. That's what the whole area of open banking is, where third-party providers or other companies using the data of people's bank accounts and integrating that data into their platforms, right? That's open banking. Whereas platform banking now is generally refers to what we were speaking to some degree earlier, where banks are integrating the services from other providers. Okay, so if we were to distinguish up, there's banking as a service, there's open banking, and there's platform banking. Banking as a service, think of it as the passporting or exporting of banking products and services to non-banks. So your supermarkets are offering credit cards. Your supermarkets are offering a bank account. That's really banking as a service. That's a manifestation of banking as a service, where the software is now being passported to a non-bank. Then you have what we call, or we just discussed right now, your open banking. Open banking is about non-banks benefiting from the data of banks, right? So a non-bank using the bank's data on particular customers, right? So in terms of the payments, instead of the kind of shopping habits and so on and so forth. It depends. Of course, there's GDPR and all this like confidentiality and stuff, but there's certain things that they can access data that they can access with permission, of course. And then there's platform banking. Platform banking is more about banks themselves integrating uh, other services from fintechs generally, right? So they can offer new types of services, different features on traditional banking platforms.
Thank you very much, Sher. By this, we reached to the end of the conversation, and I would like to thank you for being with us, for clearing our confusions, and making us understand, giving us light and knowledge on neobanking. So, moving forward, I would like to call our CEO and founder of Taib Digital Institute, Muhammad Ziaullah Siddiqui, to join the conversation and take the respective questions from the participants that have been lining up. Mr. Zia, I hope our conversation have been listened by the rest of the participants, mashallah, in the language Bahasa, in the language uh, Bengali, Urdu, and Arabic. So, who have been listening to us have been feeding themselves with the pure knowledge coming from Mufti Faraz Adam, who's giving us time to be with us. Mr. Zia, is he with us? Let me see if Mr. Zia is joining us.
It's okay. Meanwhile, I will inshallah start while you, Brother Hassan. This is Fahad. Maybe I can start the question inshallah.
Yeah.
So, Assalamu alaikum Sheikh. Jazakallah for the insightful knowledge. MashaAllah. Every time when I'm in webinar, I'm learning new things from you. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First question is it's not related to the webinar directly, but I think you touched it. It's about maybe you can just spend few seconds on it. Brother Eki Irmal, many of my friends have asked me to get salary from a company that invests on bank deposit interest. Is it halal or haram? Following, they do not understand where it's from. Please inform and ask about them, about that term. So I guess he's saying where there is no option on moving salary transfer to a interest bank. Is it halal or haram to deal with that bank?
So they get salaries from a do they work in a conventional bank, or are they just banking with a conventional bank?
No, they work in a company which is not banking, and that company invests their salary into some bank which is interest-bearing bank.
Yeah, so what a company does, that's between the company and themselves. Your job must be Sharia compliant. Your job must be halal. If the company is doing something with its funds, that's beyond your responsibility, right? Of course, if it's a Muslim, then he should be told of these, severity of dealing with, interest-based deposits and stuff. But generally, um, it's something which is beyond your scope.
Okay. Second question, Sheikh, is interesting. What are the business opportunities in Islamic fintech industry? So I guess the question is that what sort of top three business we can do using fintech industry under Islamic finance umbrella?
Okay, under Islamic finance, there's honestly a university and galaxy of opportunities. There's so many entrepreneurs coming with, in different countries, crowdfunding platforms, investment platforms. I've seen stock screeners. I've seen, you know, neobanks coming forth. I've seen wealth management firms coming. There's a number of things you can do. I've seen zakat tech. So zakat companies now trying to develop a platform where you can trace your zakat. So there's a number of things. It's honestly just upon your idea. You have a good idea, make a good business plan, and have full confidence and develop your idea. But of course, you need to do your market research, do a gap analysis, find out where the gap is in the market, and really, take it to the next level. Because right now it's the season, or it's the era of being an entrepreneur. You can come up with an idea, and inshallah, it will sell. Have full faith if the idea is good.
Okay, that's great. Absolutely. So I'm going to combine two, three questions which are common. One, the questions are on the line of what is the difference between an Islamic and sorry, read it again. Is new bank kind of Islamic banking, right? Main distinction of Islamic and conventional bank. So what they are saying is that if the bank is Islamic bank is a new bank, what is the difference between both? I guess it's technology and interest, but I'll like to answer
Uh,
this question, Chef.
yeah, I mean, see, you can have an Islamic bank, right, which might not be a neobank, right? A traditional Islamic bank, which has it's a full banking license. It has physical branches. That will not be a neobank. The whole area of a neobank is where that's why we call it a challenger bank. Neobanks are also called challenger banks because they are challenging traditional banking by being digital only and offering banking services from their platform.
Okay. Another interesting question is that how different would RegTech be applicable to Islamic banking?
No, so RegTech is still in. I mean, the whole regulation technology is still, in development. How we're trying to streamline regulation, integrate it for banking platforms, banking services. But it's a whole other area, and it's something which is being developed across different jurisdictions. The regulators are developing this and trying to ensure that there's a level playing field as well for new entrants coming in, especially the fintechs.
Okay. Another question related to the regulatory side. Uh, does new bank have their own regulatory or they will be using existing regulations? Sorry.
So it really just depends. There's some neobanks which what there's something called a sandbox in many countries. So some neobanks are sandbox products, which means that the regulators in any jurisdiction, they have a favorable treatment to these kinds of fintechs where they allow them to grow in a safe space where they can test their product, go live with the product, but in a limited capacity. But neobanks generally still have many of the same uh, regulations which apply to them. For example, in the UK, you have the FCA. They will still need an FCA license to do many things. Um, they would need to satisfy the regulators in the same way. Yes, then it just depends upon the level of the license that they have.